It was still dark over Charleston Harbor when the steamer eased away from the wharf, quiet enough that every slap of water against the hull seemed to confess something. On deck, everything looked exactly as it ought to look. A Confederate vessel, Confederate guns, Confederate signals. And at the center of it all, the man truly guiding the ship was an enslaved pilot who knew those waters better than many of the men who claimed to command them. Robert Smalls didn't simply have to take a ship. He had to wear authority without possessing it. He had to move with the captain's confidence, time the signals, pass the forts, keep the crew steady, and carry not only himself, but the waiting families below into the narrow seam between routine and catastrophe. One mistake, one hesitation, one glance too long from the wrong sentry, and the whole thing would end not as an escape, but as an execution, with water for walls and cannon for witnesses. Then, out beyond the harbor, the horizon changed. Union ships came into view. The gamble held. The steamer crossed into United States lines, delivered by Smalls and the enslaved crew who had run her, bringing freedom for their families, a valuable vessel for the Union and intelligence the Confederacy had not meant to donate. The news traveled quickly, as did the meaning behind the audacious escape. It was a dramatic escape, yes. It was also something sharper, a public demonstration of Black skill, Black judgment, and Black composure under pressure at a moment when the nation was still arguing, with dreadful seriousness, whether Black Americans were fit for citizenship at all. Welcome to Insights into History, Season 2, Episode 6, The Quietest Captain on Charleston Harbor. Robert Smalls entered history in a place where geography and labor were bound together. He was born enslaved in Beaufort, South Carolina, on April 5, 1839, in the Low Country, a world shaped by marsh, tide, harbor, and the hard economy of water. In that country, ships and channels weren't scenery. They were power. Water could be a barrier, certainly. But in time, for those who learned it, water could become a road. As a boy, around the age of 12, Smalls was sent to Charleston to be hired out. There he worked first as a waiter and a lamplighter, then at the docks, loading and unloading vessels, learning the habits of ships and cargo, of schedules and channels, of tide and timing. It was the cruel arithmetic of slavery. The body and the mind of the worker were used to create value, while the value itself belonged to someone else. Smalls was learning the machinery of commerce from inside it, though not yet for himself. That machinery was no abstraction. It was the hard, practical world of harbors, ropes, cargo, channels, shoals, routines, whistles, and the mistakes that could ground a ship or kill a man. Smalls didn't just grow familiar with boats. He became a skilled navigator. He memorized the coastlines of South Carolina and Georgia. He learned the harbor not as a passing laborer, but as a professional whose knowledge mattered. Then came marriage, and with it a deeper urgency. On December 24, 1856, Robert Smalls married Hannah Jones. They would have a number of children together. At one point, Smalls tried to purchase his family's freedom, but the price demanded was too high. Under slavery, family wasn't safety. It was exposure. A wife could be sold. A child could be taken. A household could be broken not by chance, but by design. So the question before Smalls was never merely whether he could save himself. It was whether he could save them all. When the Civil War began, the knowledge he had gathered became more valuable still. The Confederacy seized and repurposed vessels across the coast, and the Planter, a coastal steamer, became a Confederate transport and military utility vessel. She carried troops and arms and served as a dispatch boat. The Planter was used within Charleston's defensive network, helping lay and maintain harbor defenses. Yet, for all the gray flags flying overhead, the ship ran on enslaved expertise. Smalls served aboard her as a pilot. That word can sound smaller than it is. A pilot was not merely a hand at the wheel. A pilot knew the channels, the shoals, the currents, the signal routines, the locations of the forts, the expected movements of a defended port. In Charleston Harbor, that knowledge was military power. It meant knowing where a vessel could pass, what sentries expected to hear, what a normal night looked like, and how much of that normalcy depended on people not noticing who was truly making the system work. Before Robert Smalls became famous, he was doing something quieter and perhaps even more consequential. He was building a map in his head, not only of water, but of habit. Of schedules such as when officers were coming and going, when the harbor was alert, and when it was merely accustomed. Slavery had exploited that knowledge for years. In Smalls's hands, it would one day turn against slavery itself. Charleston Harbor in 1862 wasn't simply a stretch of water. It was a control system. It was forts, batteries, patrols, signal stations, checkpoints, routines, a machine built to make certain that ships and the people on them moved only as the Confederacy permitted. Smalls wasn't planning to escape through open sea. He was preparing to pass through a device built to notice movement and punish the wrong kind of it. Yet the Union blockade created a dangerous temptation. From inside Charleston Harbor, the Federal ships could be seen in the outer harbor, some 7 miles away. Freedom wasn't an abstract concept, it was visible. You could point to it. Between Smalls and that horizon stood the Confederacy's system of defenses, forts, guns, signals, routines, suspicion. The question was no longer merely whether he could escape. It was whether he could move through that entire machine without causing it to wake. The contradiction at the heart of his life, and at the heart of the Confederacy, had become impossible to ignore. Enslaved labor was not peripheral to the Southern war effort. It was built into it. Enslaved men and women loaded cargo, cooked, maintained vessels, moved supplies, worked the docks, and in Smalls's case, navigated. The Confederacy demanded black skill to sustain its war, even as it denied black humanity. It wanted expertise without freedom, labor without claim, competence without rights. That contradiction didn't end at the harbor. It would follow Smalls for the rest of his life. In 1862, the Union itself was still deciding what kind of war it was fighting. Was this a war simply to restore the Union as it had been? Or was it becoming, inevitably, a war that would have to strike slavery at its root? Smalls's escape arrived right in the middle of that uncertainty. Because he didn't arrive empty-handed. He arrived with a ship, guns, and ammunition. More importantly, he arrived with signal information, including the captain's signal book, charts, and with valuable knowledge of Charleston Harbor's mines and fortifications. He arrived with families, his own, and those of the other crewmen who had, in the plainest way imaginable, voted with their feet. There were 15 men, women, and children aboard the planter in the escape. That number is significant. This wasn't just one man defecting. It was a coordinated act of self-liberation by enslaved people who had decided that the Confederacy's claim on them was illegitimate and not worth another sunrise in bondage. In May 1862, Robert Smalls and an enslaved crew took the planter out of Charleston Harbor and delivered it to Union forces, bringing freedom not only for themselves, but for their families as well. Yet, the more closely one looks, the more astonishing this act becomes. It's tempting to tell the whole thing as one burst of nerve, one bold man, one stolen ship, one impossible getaway. But the truth is more exacting and more impressive. The escape worked because it was executed like a professional operation. The white crew members went ashore on the night of May 12, 1862. Around 3 a.m. Smalls and the others got the ship moving. They first picked up waiting family members, then headed for the outer harbor. The timing had to be exact. Too early and something might seem off. Too late and daylight would begin to sharpen every outline. They needed the hour when habit still covered them. Then there was the harbor itself. Charleston's channels and shoals were anything but forgiving. A pilot who hesitated in the wrong place, took the wrong line, or looked uncertain could attract attention as quickly as if he'd fired a pistol. Smalls knew the waterways, the geometry of the passage, the military routines, and he knew how a vessel that belonged there was supposed to behave. Then there were the signals. The forts didn't need to board the ship to stop it. They only needed to decide that something looked wrong. As the planter approached Fort Sumter, Smalls wore the captain's straw hat. He gave the proper Confederate signal, 2 long blows and a short one. He passed the harbor forts by giving the correct signals at the checkpoints, just as the vessel had done before. Here the strange brilliance of the moment becomes clear. Smalls didn't need to look like a heroic rebel. That would have ruined everything. He had to look like something far less romantic and far more useful, ordinary Confederate authority. Not dramatic authority. Not grand authority. Merely the dull, unquestioned sort that gets waved through before breakfast. It was enough for the ship to read correctly at a distance, in low light, for just long enough to pass the guns. It was theater, certainly. But it was theater in which the critics were armed with cannon. Smalls had to behave like an authorized officer until inspection became impossible. That meant posture, route knowledge, signal discipline, timing, an intimate understanding of what the system expected to see. Once he was beyond Fort Sumter and outside the harbor guns, he raised a white flag and brought the planter toward the Union blockade, where he reportedly called out, "Good morning, sir. I've brought you some of the old United States guns, sir." It was here, in that moment, that courage and competence parted ways. Courage is the decision to jump. Competence is everything that happens after the jump, when there's no second draft, no undoing, no room for theatrical error. Courage alone doesn't get a steamer through a fortified harbor. Nor does it not carry families, artillery, codebooks, charts, and intelligence to the Union fleet. Courage alone doesn't make a man signal correctly enough, steer cleanly enough, and seem ordinary enough to survive until freedom becomes real. That is why competence is the truer word. Smalls succeeded not only because he was brave enough to act, but because the system around him underestimated what an enslaved black pilot could know, remember, and execute. The Confederacy relied on black labor and black expertise while refusing to imagine black authority. Smalls turned that blindness against it. The same knowledge the system had exploited became the means by which he slipped through it. And the impact was immediate. Robert Smalls didn't reach Union lines as an argument. He reached them as evidence. He had sailed a Confederate vessel out from under fortified defenses. He had delivered guns, material, intelligence, and families. It became instantly harder to insist that black men were unfit for military responsibility, disciplined action, or command. The event was strategic, symbolic, and deeply disruptive. It wounded Confederate prestige. It provided real military value to the Union. And it helped drive forward a larger point that many Americans were still resisting with remarkable stubbornness. Black competence in war was no longer hypothetical. It was steering the ship, literally. After the escape, Smalls didn't vanish into a single night of glory. He continued in Union service, first as a pilot, then in roles of growing responsibility. Some accounts would later describe him as the first black captain of a vessel in United States service. Others would say he was the first and only African American commissioned a captain in the U.S. Navy during the Civil War. Those firsts depend on how one defines rank, command, and service. But the larger fact is beyond dispute. A man born enslaved in South Carolina was now exercising real authority on the water under United States command, while the country was still debating whether black Americans were entitled to rights at all. That wasn't symbolism. That was operational reality. If the planter escape was the opening act, Reconstruction was the full play. Because Robert Smalls didn't retire into legend after the war. He entered politics, was elected to office. Here he entered the slower, harder, less cinematic work of making freedom mean something in law and daily life. In some ways, that work was more difficult still. Stealing a ship and guiding it past forts was terrifying. Trying to steer a fragile democracy through organized resistance was another kind of danger altogether, less sudden in a single instant, more exhausting across years. Smalls served on the Beaufort County School Board in 1867. In 1868, he became a delegate to South Carolina's Constitutional Convention. There he pushed for public education to be written into the new Constitution, including compulsory attendance, because freedom, if it was to endure, couldn't rest on applause alone. It needed schools, institutions, and the plain architecture of civic life. From there he served in the South Carolina House of Representatives, then in the state Senate. He served in the state Senate from 1870 to 1874. Later, he went to Congress, serving multiple terms in the U.S. House of Representatives from South Carolina, from 1875 through 1879, from 1882 through 1883, and from 1884 through 1887. 5 terms in all. That progression isn't a side note. It's the spine of Reconstruction in one life. First came the rewriting of the rules. Then came the harder part, building institutions after they had been written down. Smalls fought over education, not as a slogan, but as a system. He fought over political power, over voting, representation, office holding, and whether black citizenship would be protected by the state or just spoken of in polite phrases before being abandoned. He fought over civil rights in daily life, over law, transportation, public access, and the stubborn question of whether rights on paper would be backed by courts, force, and political will. Yet, as so often happens in American history, the proof wasn't the problem. The proof had been delivered in 1862. The problem was what the nation would do with it. If a formerly enslaved man could plan, command, and execute under pressure, then the logic began to move. Voting rights were not charity. They were logic. Education was not a luxury. It was infrastructure. Citizenship was not a favor. It was a fact. That was what Reconstruction tested. Not simply whether slavery would end, but whether the Republic would accept the implications of what men like Smalls had already shown. And then, as ever, backlash arrived. Reconstruction was never a smooth climb upward. It was movement followed by resistance, political violence, legal sabotage, intimidation, slander, hostile rulings, exhausted alliances, and a growing national desire to move on so long as the moving on was done mostly at black expense. White resistance to black citizenship turned quickly, and often openly, toward terror and suppression. Courts narrowed protections. Legislatures chipped away at power. Newspapers mocked black officeholders as illegitimate. When argument failed, violence stood ready. Smalls lived inside that retreat. His life, after the harbor, wasn't simply escape and triumph. It was escape, build, defend, and then watch the country bargain with equality as though it were an optional expense. So his biography acquires its full weight. The harbor proves the man. The decades after the harbor test the country. One of the most symbolic facts of his post-war life reveals as much as any speech could. After the war, Smalls purchased the Beaufort property associated with the place where he had been born enslaved, the house at 511 Prince Street, connected to the McKee family. He lived there for decades. It's known today as the Robert Smalls House. That reversal feels almost too neat for history, and yet it happened. A man born into legal non-ownership bought the house bound to his own enslavement and made it a place of family, permanence, and standing. In the post-war South, a house was not simply shelter. It was an anchor, a claim. Home ownership was a declaration that one was not merely surviving history, but taking up residence in it. For generations, Smalls was better remembered locally than nationally. He had once been national news. Yet memory, like politics, is never neutral. A nation can celebrate a dramatic escape in wartime and still prove reluctant to remember what that escape demanded afterward: public education, black office holding, voting rights, civil rights enforcement, and a redistribution of power many people, in North as well as South, were not willing to sustain.